Hi, everyone. Pastor Bruce from Arkport Presbyterian Church, and I'm glad you could join us for another installment of these biblical archaeological videos. They are always covering topics that are of interest to me in the moment, and the organization of them may seem a little haphazard to you, but that's because I'm teaching what is on my heart at the time that I'm teaching it. So today's lesson is about a walkway, a road that's in Jerusalem, a road that is still under excavation today. And not everything that we've learned about this excavation has been published in peer-reviewed journals yet. I like to wait for things to settle, but we know enough about this particular road that I'm prepared to share some things that we've learned so far. This road is called the Pilgrim's Road or the Pilgrimage Road because of its construction. It's sometimes called the Stepped Street. Either way, none of these are historical names. They are modern names to describe its function at the time. And with that, let's go into our lesson, shall we? I'm going to resize this window so that we can push it off to the side, and it will largely be out of our way for the rest of this video. Well, I'd like to talk about festivals. There are three festivals identified in the Old Testament that require every male to appear before God the Lord. And by appearing before God the Lord, we would understand that they would have to go to the tabernacle or later on to the temple. The tabernacle, while they were in the desert, would be easy to get to. Everyone was there. But after entering the promised land, the tabernacle was set up in Shiloh. So at that point, depending where you lived in Israel or Judah, you'd have to become a pilgrim to go visit for these three festivals. Well, after the tabernacle period, the temple was built in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, by Solomon, King Solomon. And then the requirement would be for the men to pilgrim or have a pilgrimage to Jerusalem 3 times a year for these festivals. The 3 festivals being Passover, Shavuot or Pentecost, and Sukkot, the festival of booths. These 3 festivals are called out for. I highlight in the yellow text in Exodus 23. This is where the requirement comes from. Now, after the last temple is destroyed, the second temple in 70 AD, the requirement for men to have a pilgrimage to Jerusalem is suspended until the temple is once again built. The third temple is built. At the top of this graphic, I have 3 symbols of Judaism, but one of them doesn't really belong in a biblical archaeological lesson. That's the first one we encounter, the Star of David. I put it up there just so I might speak to it for a moment. It is a symbol of Judaism. It is a symbol of Israel, but it's a modern symbol. The Star of David became a Zionist symbol in the late 19th century. And it was incorporated into the Israel national flag in 1948 when the country was formed. The middle symbol is the 10 Commandments, written in Hebrew, symbolically written in Hebrew. And the right symbol is the 7-headed candlestick. And both the 10 Commandments and the candlestick are related to Old Testament worship of God, and they are related in their own ways to New Testament worship of God as well. On the right-hand side of our graphic is a map of Israel at the time of Jesus. The red dot symbolizes or it points to where Jerusalem is, and the yellow lines indicate roads by which pilgrims might make their way to Jerusalem to celebrate these 3 festivals. Well, we're on our way to Jerusalem in Jesus's time for the 3 festivals, in part because, that's where Herod's temple. It's God's temple, and Herod didn't even build it. It was built in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah after the Babylonian captivity. Cyrus the Great frees the Jews to come back to their homeland, the land promised by God. They rebuild Jerusalem, and then they rebuild the temple. And in Herod's day, Herod being a wonderful architect, that's perhaps the only wonderful thing we might say about Herod, being a wonderful architect, he rebuilt or added on to the temple to add majesty and, of course, gold, size, beauty, marble, limestone, making it a shiny and bright and monumental structure, much bigger than the second temple had been until his artisans got involved. And so the one thing that Herod's temple, I say Herod's temple, forgive me, this temple was missing was that it didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. No matter how grand Herod could make it, it was lacking the Ark of the Covenant within the Holy of Holies. That had been lost to history after the Babylonian sacking and destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. When that first temple period ended, we have lost sight and track of the Ark of the Covenant. And within the Ark of the Covenant were the two sets of the Ten Commandments that God had given to Moses. There was Aaron's staff. There was a jar of manna. Upon the Ark of the Covenant were two cherubims whose wings met, and it said that was God's mercy seat, where he sat above and dispensed not only judgment, but mercy upon his people. That was no longer there, and yet people still came to the temple to encounter God. And what we know from the Gospel of Luke chapter 1, indeed, powerful encounters with God were still available to the faithful. The priest Zechariah, who was John the Baptist's dad, he has an encounter with God as he is serving inside the temple. And Jesus himself in the Gospels referred to the temple as my Father's house and my house. And so we know that ordained out of the very mouth of Jesus is this proclamation that the temple was still the house of God. So as pilgrims would come out of obligation to these festivals, they needed to do something to prepare themselves, and what they needed to do was to become ceremonially clean. Now, over the ages, that would involve different rituals, but in Jesus's time, it involved the mikvah bath. In Gospel of John, we have a hint of that in chapter 11. See, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many pilgrims went up from the country to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was on a hill, so whether you're coming from the north or the south or the east or the west, you were coming up to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before Passover. Well, how would one become ceremonially clean? By taking a mikvah bath, by going into a pool of water and submerging and then emerging ceremonially clean. On the right-hand side of this slide, we have a picture of a mikvah, one of several that are in Qumran. You may know that city, Qumran. It is by the Dead Sea. It is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. It was in a Essene community with very strict regulations on how they conducted their lives. And one of the strict regulations involved a daily mikveh bath. They needed to be ceremonially clean every day. This particular bath had a dividing in its staircase so that the ceremonially unclean would walk down on one side. After immersing themselves in the pool, they would walk up on the other side so that their cleansed footsteps would not have to trod where their uncleansed footsteps had trod. Other mikvahs that we've discovered have steps that go in on one side and steps that come out on the other side. This one is divided by a structure between the unclean side and the clean side. Well, as I said, the mikvah was the standard way for becoming ceremonially clean, and we find mikvahs throughout Judah in this time period of Jesus. Around Jerusalem itself, we've uncovered hundreds of mikveh. Some of them are very small. They're just personal mikvehs. They're a mikveh for a family. Others may be able to accommodate a few people at a time, but none of them are terribly large. In this example, in this photo, you could see that you could have a few people walking in, immersing, and then walking out, and you could have a line of people. Even so, the question is, during festivals, would hundreds of mikveh be enough for all the pilgrims? Well, Titus Flavius Josephus, a first century Jewish historian who worked for the general Vespasian, he recorded a few really important books for us. Jewish Wars and Antiquities are two books that he recorded that are just full of very meaningful historical information. It suggested that he was prone to some measure of exaggeration. Hard to say where to draw the line on some of his numbers. But apart from exaggeration, he is considered to be an excellent historical source. He wrote that over 2.5 million pilgrims would arrive for the Jewish festivals. That's a lot of pilgrims. If its number is even close, hundreds of mikveh will not get the job done, not even close. So how do you deal with pilgrims who are arriving, many of them just in time for the holiday? How do you deal with that large crowd of people who need to be ceremonially clean each time they go to temple? Oh, well, that leads me to the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam may be such a mikveh of gigantic proportion. On the left is a picture of what has been excavated out of the Pool of Siloam. You see that there are some sitting and lying down steps to the left. There's a platform sort of in the middle of that. And to the right, there are some steps to descend into the pool. And perhaps the bottom of the pool is all the way to the right of this screen below the very last step that you can see. Most of this pool has not been excavated, however. If you look to the right of that picture that's on your left, you see that there's a wall of dirt up there. That wall of dirt looks like it's about 15 feet to 20 feet in various places. But that dirt is on private property. Cannot be excavated without permission, and permission has not been given. So the majority of the Pool of Siloam is actually still underground. But we have a good sense of where the pool is located because of ground penetrating radar. We can go and find where the pool ends. On the right-hand side is an artistic rendering of what that pool might have looked like in the time of Jesus. It's not exactly rectangular, it's more trapezoidally shaped. But you could see that large numbers of pilgrims could become ceremonially cleansed by walking across this pool, dipping while they're in the middle, emerging while they're in the middle. The unclean lining up on one side and walking through and emerging ceremonially clean on the other side. Very large numbers could be serviced in this way. Well, why would we think that the Pool of Siloam might be a public mikveh? Well, because it is at the very end of a road that we're calling the Pilgrim's Road, if indeed that is an apt name for it. It is a road that leads from the Pool of Siloam to the southwest corner of the Temple Mount. Robinson's Arch is what archaeologists call the southwest corner of that temple. And the road is about 600 yards long, and it goes from where the pool is, ascending up that ridge line to where the temple is. So one has to sort of walk uphill from the Pool of Siloam. So there's a clue that it might have been a mikvah because this is a very large walkway, and it makes sense that the pilgrims would be on this walkway, and it would make sense that this would be a good place for them to become ceremonially clean on their way. It also has lively water to it. A mikveh cannot be a bath that you pour buckets of water into. A mikveh needs to have lively water serving. It needs to have a flow, even if it's a trickle flow. And it could be from a natural spring. It could be through a river. It could be a little creek. You could build a ditch where natural water is collected in a reservoir and allowed to then drip into your pool. You can't fill that reservoir with buckets. It has to be naturally filled. But as long as there's this natural flow of water, it meets the requirement for a mikveh, because water needs to be lively for it to have the ceremonially effective cleansing of the individual. It does make me think of John the Baptist dunking people in the Jordan River, lively water that's flowing, and they're being fully immersed, and they're being immersed for the cleansing of their sins, for the remission of their sins, as John the Baptist is thinking about it. And the mikveh and John's baptism, I believe, are spiritually connected in their symbology. So, large pool at the end of the Pilgrim's walkway, a walkway that seems very well designed to help large numbers of people make their way to temple, who would have to be ceremonially clean to arrive at the temple and to do their worship business there. And it's supplied by living water via what is called Hezekiah's tunnel, and the water source being the Gihon Springs. And that will be another archaeological lesson altogether, Hezekiah's tunnel and the Gihon Springs. So how did we discover these steps? Well, the main discovery came because of serendipity. That's right. Serendipity plays a big role in architecture. And so I highlight archaeology. And so I highlight in green some things that are useful to think about when thinking about biblical archaeology. The main discovery happened by accident, and it happened very recently by archaeological standards in 2004. A sewer main breaks underneath a potato field, and out we go with the crew to dig up and repair that sewer. But in Israel, especially in Jerusalem, you never send diggers anywhere without archaeologists. Especially in Jerusalem, you cannot drive a shovel deep into the ground and not find something that is historically significant. So in the state of New York, if you're going to dig, you have to find out if there's gas line there, if there's an electrical line there. Well, in Jerusalem, you have to find out, is there a tremendous piece of history waiting to be found right where you want to dig? I'll tell you, the same thing happens in Hawaii today. No construction takes place without historians coming out and inspecting for bones, burial grounds of native Hawaiians, ancient burial grounds. And if they find bones, construction stops. There's an archaeological inspection. The bones are recovered and in a dignified manner relocated to a place where we commemorate the indigenous peoples of Hawaii. So that's the kind of activity that takes place. So the archaeologists come and they're digging up this broken sewer pipe, and whoa, they find some beautiful stones, a walkway of stones, one that wasn't anticipated, right by the pool of Siloam. And you can see here is a sewer pipe that is going above the height of the pool and well below the ground of level. The level of ground? Below ground level. There we go. Now, the pool of Siloam is about 600 yards from the southwest corner of the temple. Did I miss something? I guess not. Well, let me say this. The walkway has been discovered to have been built around the time of Pontius Pilate. Originally, the suspicion was that Herod built it. I mean, Herod was the architect king, right? I mean, he built Masada, a magnificent palace fortress. He built Herodia, Herodium, a magnificent palace fortress. He expanded the temple. He built Caesarea to service the Romans and to provide commerce to Israel. I mean, he was the architect king. He really built a lot of things. And so why wouldn't he build a walkway for the pilgrims to come and see his temple, the temple that he expanded? Well, turns out that we know by virtue of coins that were discovered underneath the walkway, that the walkway was completed well after Herod's death. In fact, the walkway was completed while Pontius Pilate was the Roman official officiating in Judea. Now, just as an interest point, I have a picture of a monument, an engraved stone identifying the role of Pontius Pilate up in Caesarea, which was the place where the Roman consulate, the Roman guard even, would normally reside rather than in Jerusalem, because it was a pagan Roman village built by King Herod to keep the Romans happy. He was a wise, earthly wise man, King Herod was. And there is this stone. So where was this stone? Was it by the palace where Pontius Pilate lived? No. Was it dug out at some place that was there to commemorate Pontius Pilate? No. In Caesarea, Herod had built a racetrack, he'd built a theater to help the Romans be happy outside of Jerusalem, and happy to protect and to serve, right? So he kept them away, but accessible. And so he was always adding to this city in Caesarea. And when archaeologists were digging out the stadium, one of the stands where I believe this was for the horse track, and they had to take away the dirt that was just covered with dirt, and then they'd find the steps, and some of the steps were not in good repair, and so they wanted to reset some of the stones, and as they're resetting some of the seating stones, they find some of the bric-a-brac. Well, they found this stone, which was just used as rubble to build up the embankment, not a seating stone, but just underneath the seating stones to build them up. And they find this stone that had this engraving on it. Pontius Pilate, if you will, had been lost. There was no interest in keeping a stone from some previous potentate from Rome. Just take that stone. It's no better than rubble. It has carving on it. Just stuff it underneath the seats, put some good seating stones on top of it, and we're good to go. And that is so often true in biblical archaeology and archaeology in general. Stones are reused, and sometimes stones have very important information on them that no one is preserving intentionally. They're just using it as rubble to build something else that they actually want. And we discover things like this a little bit out of place. That's one of the fun things about biblical archaeology, is the serendipity by which we find things. It also means that we shouldn't give up hope when we don't find what we're looking for where we're looking for it. It might just be reused someplace else. And that brings us to the actual topic of this video, and that is the walkway, the steps, the path that leads from the Pool of Siloam to the southwest corner of the temple. I hope when you look at the photo on the right, you think to yourself, man, those are good looking stones. They look practically brand new. I hope that's what you're thinking. If you were to go to, if you go to Rome today, if you were to go to Pompeii, you would not see, or any other ancient city, you wouldn't see stones preserved like this, because the elements will destroy the stones, because using them will destroy the stones, put wear and tear on them and cracking, and they'll break up, but not these stones. These stones are just, they look like the street has just been made. And for all intents and purposes, on an archaeological scale, this walkway is brand new. It was built as we think it might have been completed by around 31 AD based on the coins that we find underneath it. And then in 70 AD, the Romans destroy the city of Jerusalem. They go and they wreak havoc on all of Judea because of a Jewish uprising against the Roman emperor, which the Roman emperor did not take kindly. And so the armies of Rome destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple, not one stone left upon another, as Jesus had predicted to his disciples. Well, this walkway, which had only been in use starting in 31, was, or thereabouts, was covered with rubble by 70 AD. It's only 40 years old, brand new by most standards. It's covered by the rubble of buildings that were on either side of the walkway. On either side of the Pilgrim Road were buildings that were 1 to 2 stories high. That's what the archaeologists tell us. And as the Romans toppled all the buildings, easy to topple a building into an empty roadway. So while this roadway in the time of Jesus was exposed to the air, was on top of the ground, as most roadways are, now this roadway, some places it's 50 feet below ground. And that's a reminder to us of how cities get built up in old times. You didn't have bulldozers come in when a city was raised to remove all the rubble and start from ground level. No, you built on top of the rubble. Too much work to remove rubble. So instead, you just build a new city on top of the old city. And as cities were destroyed, each destruction layer would be the building layer for the next history in that city's ongoing history. That's how we get the word, or that's how we get what are called tells, T-E-Ls, as cities are built up layer upon destruction layer upon destruction layer. Now, there's an ongoing excavation right now, we'll cover that later, in Jerusalem, where they are 10 destruction layers down in what they are discovering, going back to the time of David in Jerusalem. So 10 destruction layers down, we are finding very old accounts of what's going on in the city. If 10 destruction layers sounds like a lot, on Mount Megiddo, they have discovered 27 destruction layers. I mean, going back to, even before the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians, and layer upon layer upon layer, as new conquerors come in and build another city on top of the destruction layer of the previous occupants. Well, so here we have this beautiful walkway that will someday be 600 yards long. We've reconstructed 350 yards of it. In some places it's 50 feet below ground. In other places it's 10 feet below ground. When it's 10 feet below ground and there are buildings up above, one better put a lot of steel arches up there to support the weight of everything that's going on, whether that be a home or a bridge or a road. And so a lot of investment, as you can see, to build this arch to support this walkway. This walkway is up to 24 feet wide. In some places, they've only excavated half the walkway, and they're going to come back and do the other half later. In other places, they've excavated the whole walkway, but because they didn't want to build a 24-foot arch, instead, they have a wall that goes down halfway through, and the arch is supported on either side as they build and excavate this walkway. Well, and on this slide in the lower right-hand corner, you see where some construction workers are, and you see the wall of perhaps on the side of the road of some building or structure that hadn't been totally taken down there. Well, as I said, the buildings were pushed over and collapsed into this walkway. Certainly the upper stories were collapsed as the houses were being destroyed by the Roman armies, and whatever was in the houses fell into the street. And I just have a few artifacts I'll show you, and then we're done for the day. Here's a beautiful little piece of a table carved in limestone. Everywhere you go in Israel today, beautiful carvings. And limestone carvings could last for a very long time in Israel. It's a dry climate, doesn't get a lot of rain, and gets no freezing rain, no sleet to destroy that. So limestone survives. Limestone carvings do a better job of surviving in Israel than, say, some of the headstones that we have up here in New York. Oh, this is a fun discovery. So let me take a few moments to talk about this. They discovered along the pilgrimage walkway a marketplace, an open marketplace where you could go and buy liquid goods like olive oil or wine. You could buy solid goods, and you could trade in precious metals. All those things could happen here in a marketplace that was right along the road, right along this Pilgrim's Way. Well, what we have over here on the right is a picture of a certified measuring volume. And this is where the officials of the marketplace would make sure that the merchants were being fair in what they were selling. And this is a calibrated table for measuring liquid measuring cups, okay? This is how it would work. This object actually was part of a table. And the official would sit at the table, and he would take his finger, and he would plug the hole. He'd put his hand underneath the table, and he would plug the hole that the red arrow is pointing to in this picture. You see there's a little hole at the bottom of that bowl, and he'd plug the hole. And then he'd grab a pitcher of water, and he'd fill that depressed bowl. And when the water got to the top of the bowl, it would flow out. You see there's a little flat area at the top of that recessed bowl area, and the water would just pour off onto the table, and the table would just guide the water to the ground, and that water is wasted onto the ground. Now the merchant would bring his cup, his measuring bowl, and place it underneath the table, underneath where the merchant's finger is plugging the hole. And then the official could remove his finger, the water would pour out of the calibrated bowl into the measuring cup that the merchant had. Well, if water overflows the merchant's cup is too small. He's cheating his customers. He's been found out. If the water flows into the merchant's cup and there's still room left, well, then the merchant is being generous to his customers, giving them a little extra over what they're paying for. And if the water just fills the measuring cup, then it's a very fair measuring system. Neither the merchant nor the customer is getting the better end of the deal. They're just paying for what they're buying, getting what they paid for. And that's how that works. There have only been 3 such measuring tables, I believe only 3 discovered in all of Judea. So that's a really neat find. So let's look at the right-hand picture. If you're not careful, you might think, oh, is that a picture of the moon? But it's not. It's a little rock marble of a certified weight. And if we look at the symbol that is on that weight, what we know is it actually is a shekel weight. It weighs 11.4, 11.3 plus grams. It's a shekel. And we often think of a shekel as a coin that has a particular value, but really a shekel is a weight. And when that weight is in silver, depending on when that coin is minted, yeah, it has a value, but its value is based on the weight of the silver, not because somebody said, oh, it has a pretty picture on it and it's worth this much. You don't actually need to type on there what it's worth. What you need to type on there is what it weighs. And that's an interesting weight that has been found in the marketplace. I'll just, on the left-hand side, I show you a number of official weights that we have found throughout Judea. And the weight that's all the way to the right, the Becca, that's actually an interesting weight for us, because the Becca is half the weight of a shekel. It's a half shekel. And we remember from Exodus that the temple tax, or the tabernacle tax, was a half shekel. Every male would have to make this contribution of a becca, or a half shekel of silver, as homage, or as payment, as a donation, as a gift offering, to participate in sanctuary worship. Oh, another little find, a beautiful little ring. Where did they find this ring? They found it inside of a personal mikveh, a small bath, a family bath, probably just good enough for one person at a time. It's a pretty little ring with a gemstone. Probably fell off of the finger while bathing, or maybe it was put on the side and it fell in. And it was lost to history for 2,000 years, until the Pilgrim's Road was being excavated and it was rediscovered. What a pretty little ring. And this is the last item I'll show you. There are many, many items I could have shown you, but this is the last one I'm going to show you today. It's a picture of a little bell. It's a gold bell. It has a little clapper inside. It dings. It's carved to look a little bit like a pomegranate. And on the left, in the yellow boxed text, we find that there are these instructions that the priestly garments were to be adorned with pomegranates and with gold bells. I believe the number is 72 gold bells on the high priest's robe. As the high priest walked by, you'd be definitely able to hear him. As he served the Lord in the temple, there would always be a sound that was being made by the activities of the priest and the high priest. This little bell was found. Do we know for sure that it comes off the garb of a high priest or a priest? We don't know that. But it fits our expectations, and it fits biblical descriptions. So there you are, a little gold bell found on the walkway between the pool of Siloam and the southwest corner of the temple. Well, that's where we end up today. I hope you enjoyed this little journey along this walkway, leading from the pool of Siloam to the temple. Next week, I'm going to cover more details about the pool of Siloam and how it is fed from the Gihon spring, and how we come to know of the pool of Siloam within the Bible. You can find this and other biblical archaeological videos at the Pastor Bruce Ince YouTube channel. Look for the Archeology playlist. Or you can find links to that at our Arkport Presbyterian Church website at arkpres.org. And you can always find out more about the life of our church by seeing us, visiting with us on Facebook. Until we get together again, may you have a blessed day. See you soon, I hope.